The Boys Season 5 is officially over, and as you can imagine, the fan reception has not been particularly great, and as someone who probably enjoyed the finale more than most, I thought I would take a look back at Season 5 as a whole, because although, like I said, I did enjoy a lot of elements from the series finale and a couple other episodes throughout the season, I can also admit that Season 5 as a whole was definitely not their strongest season, and considering the fact that this is literally the last season of the entire series, you want to go out on a very high note. And looking back on Season 5 after going through and rewatching it a few times, I can definitely acknowledge why a lot of people had so many issues with this season. And even the finale of the season had multiple issues in the episode that are much more apparent after rewatches. So that made me wonder, how could you actually fix this season? How could you make it that the series finale doesn't piss off the fans, but also stays true to the original story you wanted to tell? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, because today we're talking Season 5 of The Boys should have ended this way. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, getting into The Boys Season 5, things that could have changed that would have drastically improved the overall fan reception. Now, this isn't going to be me sitting here saying that Homelander should have won and burned everything to the ground. No, although I think that would have been pretty interesting. I do think overall, the ending for each character was pretty fitting. Now, there are certain characters that I despise their ending, and I will address those in this video. However, we will still get to that moment between Homelander and Butcher. I think the ending for those two characters is absolutely perfect, but I feel like a lot of this season did not build up properly to both of those moments. So I truly believe that is why a lot of fans hated a lot of the finale. A lot of it also felt rushed, and that's because a lot of Season 5 was dedicated to Soulja Boy's prequel series. So I feel like you have to take a lot of that out. But since we're speaking about Soulja Boy, his character is actually one of the first things I want to address. You see, I love Soulja Boy. He is probably my favorite character in all of The Boys. However, that being said, there are certain elements that I was not a fan of that were very prominent in this season. I absolutely love his dynamic with Homelander. I love how their bond gets more solidified after they go to that V1 facility. I think all of that should have stayed. I think all of that was necessary character development for both of these characters. However, what I don't think is necessary is his love for Stormfront being so forced. And by that, I don't necessarily mean that he couldn't have had feelings for Stormfront, as we know he literally started Herogasm with her, so he would obviously have some type of history with her. But the fact that he was so in love with her that he was willing to get over all his anger he had towards Homelander made absolutely no sense, and him giving the V1 to Homelander being solely because it is what Stormfront would have wanted makes absolutely no sense, especially when you consider the fact that in Season 3, when Soulja Boy comes back, he even says that he loves Crimson Countess. He says that while he was being tortured, for decades, mind you, Crimson Countess was the only person he was thinking of. He kept thinking she would come and rescue him. Now, if he was in love with Stormfront, as much as the writers want us to believe he was, then why would he not be thinking about Stormfront? He would have no reason to believe that she had been killed by that point. He knew nothing about her actual fate. So if he was so in love with her, why would he not have been envisioning her when he was being tortured? So I feel like if you take out all of those elements of Soulja Boy basically simping over Stormfront for a majority of Season 5, I feel like it would be a lot better. Now, I do still think that Sister Sage's plan does make somewhat of sense to create a little bit of friction between Homelander and Soulja Boy, trying to use Stormfront to do that. And I do believe that Soulja Boy getting mad in the moment when he sees what Homelander was doing to a disabled Stormfront, I think it would have pissed him off to the point where it would have created a little bit of friction. However, the thing that I think annoys me most about that was the fact that the only thing that brought them back together was Soulja Boy's love for Stormfront, and was the fact that Stormfront would have wanted Soulja Boy to give Homelander the V1. In my opinion, Soulja Boy should have in that moment told Homelander that although he had genuine care for Stormfront, it wasn't true love, but he can see in his son's eyes that what he and Stormfront shared was true love. And not only that, he actually has grown to care for his son. You could have had a very heartfelt moment between Soulja Boy and Homelander, more solidifying their bond together. And another mistake mistake that I think this series made was after Homelander does get that V1, just cutting the scene, and the next episode they don't address how the boys got out of that insane situation. Because keep in mind, this is Homelander now amped up on V1 right next to Soldier Boy, so you have quite literally the two strongest soups in the verse right there, and all of the boys were just able to escape with no issue at all. No, not in this scenario. You see, I believe what should have happened is Homelander and Soldier Boy realize that the boys and Sister Sage are in the area, so they do begin their search. And as they begin their search, they are about to reach the boys and take them out when someone swoops in to save the day. It is not Ryan, it is not Marie, it is none other than Queen Maeve. And yes, I know she lost her powers. However, there is a thing called Temp V, something that gives people powers for 24 hours. However, do you know we have no precedent, at least to my knowledge, for what happens to a former soup who had actual Compound V giving themselves Temp V? And because this is the case, because there is no precedent set, it means that I can essentially say whatever happens when she injects Temp V will happen, and it won't contradict anything we've gotten from the series. And now I will not say it will make her a god and it will give her her permanent powers back. What I will say is that she would return to the state she was in when she was an actual soup, meaning she gets all of the powers that she had when she was an actual soup. The only caveat is that it's for only 24 hours. Now, why did Queen Maeve show up? This might seem pretty out there, right? Well, no. You see, Sister Sage brought Soldier Boy there to take out Bomb Sight. She did this because she thought the rift she had created between Homelander and Soldier Boy was so insurmountable that these two characters would end up killing each other. But in that moment, she realized she was wrong. They had concocted a scenario in which the world's smartest person could have theoretically been wrong, and it would have made sense. And I know a lot of people had an issue with that, but I will still stand by the fact that it makes sense Sister Sage was wrong in that scenario. She didn't go to the V1 facility. She doesn't understand the emotional connection that had happened. All she knows is that Soldier Boy does feel more fatherly towards Homelander, but she doesn't understand exactly why. And that fundamental misunderstanding of the situation and of the character's emotions is extremely key. However, that being said, she is still the world's smartest person. So I personally believe even if she is wrong, she would have still had a contingency plan, because even if there is just a small fraction of a percentage that her plan could fail, she could not risk the two strongest soups being right there side by side ready to kill both of them. So I feel like her plan B would be to contact Queen Maeve, inform her of the situation, and Queen Maeve would use Temp V in order to help. And as she swoops in, she fights Soldier Boy one-on-one as the boys try to escape. And as this is going on, Homelander does start to catch up to the rest of the boys, and this is when Frenchie would make his ultimate sacrifice. He would stay behind to lead Homelander away. He would lead Homelander away, allowing for the other characters to all escape, and this would be Frenchie's sacrifice. It would lead to him actually getting killed by Homelander, and Soldier Boy unfortunately would end up killing Queen Maeve. And although it really sucks that she doesn't get that happy ending, she would get a very triumphant return. She would have the knowledge that she was responsible for ultimately helping the boys to win, because she was the only reason they were able to escape. This would create a very high tense situation for all of the characters, and it would also create so much emotion for not only the characters to experience, but also for the audience to experience. We will have just watched Queen Maeve and Frenchie, two characters that are beloved, both sacrifice their life and die at the hands of the two strongest soups in the verse and the two big bad main villains of the final season. Now, another big character change that I believe should have happened actually comes between Stan Edgar and Black Noir. I believe that Stan Edgar was not in this season nearly enough, and the only way that it would make sense for him to not be as present is if he had a plan in a background, a plan that started off screen before this season, and that plan would be to replace the new Black Noir with the old Black Noir, who is actually a clone of the old Black Noir. And I know in the comics it is traditionally a clone of Homelander. However, I feel like this would actually add a little bit more nuance to the story, and it would allow us to see that version of Black Noir once again, because I do feel like his story came to an abrupt end, and there were certain things that weren't tied up very nicely. So I feel like bringing him back in this way would have fit really well, and it also would have explained why he once again went silent, and it makes way way more sense than the actor under Noir just deciding to go full method. I thought all of that was incredibly stupid. I think you can still have the rift forming between him and the Deep because, like I mentioned before, this would be a clone of the original Noir, someone who didn't talk. And one of the biggest reasons I would have him brought back would be to help in the fight against the two strongest soups, the two big bad villains that we have. So around the time of probably episode 7, we would have Soldier Boy going after the boys. As Homelander starts to take over the country, he would still kill the president. He would tell Ashley to start disbanding Congress and to start passing all the laws he was mentioning. And as all this is happening, Soldier Boy is hot on the tail of the boys, and he actually does find them. And in this moment, we get a fight between Butcher, Starlight, Soldier Boy, the clone Black Noir, and Marie Moreau. Now, I haven't mentioned anything about any Gen V characters. I know a lot of people were very pissed off that the Gen V characters had essentially no stakes in this plot of this final season. And while I will admit I have not watched Gen V, so I have essentially no knowledge about any of the characters, Marie is someone that I have heard a lot about, and so I did a little bit of a deep dive on her powers, and considering how absolutely broken her abilities are, she is someone that I would have absolutely wanted more involvement with in this season, but I will get to her in a little bit. Just know that at this moment, she will be officially part of the boys. So in this fight, Soldier Boy has to go up against someone who can telekinetically manipulate blood, whether that's her blood or the blood inside of other people. And you could theoretically say, because he and Homelander have V1, that her blood control isn't as absolute, but it would be still something that would help slow Soldier Boy down. That would help inhibit his movements and his actions. So during this fight, he would be severely handicapped. And this would give Butcher, Starlight, and the clone Black Noir the perfect opportunity to take out Soldier Boy. I feel like this would be enough characters with enough power to feasibly take out Soldier Boy without the internet totally freaking out and saying the power scaling is broken. Again, as someone who loves Soldier Boy and has him as probably their favorite character, this would be a scenario that Soldier Boy would get taken out, and I wouldn't have any particular issues with it. It would fit, it wouldn't break any type of canon established, and it wouldn't destroy the power scaling of the boys universe. So at this moment, you then would have Soldier Boy dead. The boys would have this triumphant moment, but they would also acknowledge that they still probably do not have enough power to take out Homelander. So this is where Sister Sage would come in with her plan. She would still be trying to recreate Soldier Boy's beam using Kimiko, and a lot of the later episodes would focus on this. I think just having it be part of one episode was a mistake. I think more should have went into it, and I think something that should have prompted Sister Sage to do this was her actually being somewhat wrong. She didn't predict Soldier Boy siding with Homelander, and her ultimate backup plan led to the death of Queen Maeve and also Frenchie. So I feel like she would be even more dedicated to recreating Soldier Boy's blast. And once they're successful with doing this, we then would have the team officially set and ready to go up against Homelander. However, it's important to note, I did mention Marie Moreau will be part of that team. And the reason she would be part of that team, her and Starlight would have connected a ton while Huey was in that camp. And over that time, Starlight and Marie would have been training. So Marie could master her powers as much as possible for this upcoming fight. It would also create a deeper bond between Starlight and Marie. However, before we could get to that final battle, we would also have to have something else that has been promised to us since the beginning of the boys, and that is actually Scorched Earth. And I'm not talking about a huge epic battle between Butcher and Homelander. I'm talking about Homelander going absolutely insane. And I feel like it should have happened during his teleprompter reading in episode 8. However, in this scenario, it will happen in episode 7, shortly after Homelander learns of the death of Soldier Boy, and he learns how it happens. And although he has to keep his composure to read this message out to the American people, once he reads those lines about father and son, everything about Soldier Boy would flash before him, and everything regarding Ryan would flash before him. Because keep in mind, in this scenario, Ryan would have still had that altercation with Homelander. So Homelander now knows that he nearly beat his son to death, and his father learned to believe in him only to end up dead shortly after. So this would cause him to absolutely snap, and maybe even start to listen in on different aspects of the world as they hear his message to them, and it would lead him to become incredibly pissed off. And this is when Homelander would fly off during this teleprompter address and start to go absolutely crazy. I'm talking going and killing stadiums full of people, wiping probably one entire city off the entire map. He would do something so egregiously bad to showcase that this is truly the end times, that he has truly snapped. And this would solidify why the boys have to go into the White House to take him out. An all-out assault to take out this monster. And I feel like this would also give fans the scorched earth that they have been wanting. They have been wanting to see Homelander go absolutely insane. It's something we've been promised since virtually the beginning of the series, but we didn't even get to see him slaughter an entire crowd of people. That is something that should have happened in this season. So I feel like this moment, just watching a montage of Homelander going absolutely ballistic on the world to get them to submit to him, would have been an absolutely amazing moment. And then in episode 8, you could have a moment where it shows the aftermath of a lot of this. You could see multiple people in internment camps, and you could see multiple people tuning into his weekly messages to them. And you could see the difference between the internment camps and between the people watching who completely worship him. And I feel like those weekly messages would be important because this fight taking place while the prompter is still on is probably one of my favorite things that the actual finale did. So in this scenario, that would still happen. And a lot of things also happen the same way that happened in episode 8 once they get to the White House. Starlight would still attack the Deep. She would get him out of the White House and they would have their one-on-one fight. And Huey would take on O-Father, leading to his ultimate demise. And then Kimiko and Butcher would still take on Homelander. However, they would have help from Marie Moreau. And not only that, it would be revealed very early on during this fight that Noir isn't there to help Homelander. He's actually there to help stop Homelander. And then you would have a fight between these four characters. And anytime Homelander would want to escape because he realizes the danger he's in, not just because of all these powerful soups, but also because Kimiko now has a way to actually take away his powers, he would be halted by Marie Moreau and her powers. And not only that, Black Noir is also there. So it would just help with anyone who had any doubts or issues with Homelander not being able to speed blitz everyone and speed blitz out of that situation. I feel like Marie being there would create a logical situation for Homelander to be a bit slower and possibly not be at his absolute strongest. However, even with all four of these characters teaming up together, it would still be incredibly difficult and Homelander would still have an actual advantage. And as he starts to beat them down, he does still attempt to fly off. And in this moment, we see Ryan once again swoop in. However, the important caveat here would be that it wouldn't be the first time we see Ryan after his beatdown with Homelander in a previous episode, and then they have their talk in the cabin. No, throughout this season, I believe you should have seen quick flashes to Ryan, and those quick flashes should have been showing two things. One, watching the state of the world and Homelander addressing the world, and two, him going through a traditional anime training arc. Yes, I mean a scenario in which the main hero gets their ass beat by the main villain but is left to live, so they use basically all of their time and energy in getting stronger. Stronger so that they can take down this incredibly horrific monster. And you don't have to show a lot of this. Like I mentioned, it could be little quick snippets, maybe a minute and a half to 3 minutes each time it is shown, just to give the audience the knowledge that Ryan is trying to perfect his powers. And you don't really need him to do it with anyone else. He's just trying to focus and harness his abilities better. So this way, in the finale, when he swoops in, he would be much more capable than he was even in the actual finale we saw. So this would also further justify Homelander not being able to just speed blitz anyone or just speed himself out of that scenario, because Ryan would also be there. And I feel like all of these characters being there to take on Homelander would be more than enough to hold him down, and it would take away a lot of the issues and comparisons people are having, because they say that Ryan and Butcher being able to hold down a amped up V1 Homelander makes no sense when Huey, Butcher, and Soldier Boy were not able to do this in season 3. And while I do understand that argument, even though V1 isn't shown to actually upgrade your powers, it's just much more potent, but I do still somewhat understand what people are trying to say. So in this scenario, you would have Marie using her blood manipulation to help hold Homelander down. You would have Butcher trying to hold Homelander down. You would also have Black Noir and Ryan helping to hold Homelander down. And in this scenario, I truly believe that this would be more effective effective than what we got in season 3. So effective that Kimiko would fire off that beam, depowering everyone except Ryan in that room. And then, as we know, virtually everything would happen exactly how it did in the finale. Homelander would notice he doesn't have powers, he would be incredibly vulnerable, he would start begging for his life, only to eventually be killed by Butcher. And after this happens, virtually everything else happens essentially the same. However, the one little caveat is that when we see Stan Edgar later on talking to the media, he is not standing up there alone. He actually has Black Noir up there, and he is positioning things as if Black Noir was the sole reason they were able to stop Homelander, who had gone rogue, who had gone insane. And this would help Billy to realize that history is quite literally repeating itself. So it would make his snap, although still feel pretty rushed, feel a little bit more organic, because he would at least see clear as day that the next Homelander replacement is right there, already being painted to the public as a hero, even though Butcher knows Noir is a psychopath. So after this, we would then get that final confrontation between Huey and Butcher. It would go down virtually the same. However, the only difference would be that Huey would arrive there and he would see the conclusion of a fight between Noir and Butcher, which, although would have been quick, it still would have been pretty cool to see. And you would see Butcher actually killing Black Noir, and essentially everything else then happens the same as well. Huey takes down Butcher in the way he does. The only thing that I personally would then have issue with is the sprinkler systems would need to be addressed, because for all we know, all the virus is just remaining in the sprinklers. So anytime there's a fire, just the soup killing virus is going to go everywhere. And as Butcher said, it would eventually infect the world. So I feel like that getting addressed is pretty important. And the last change I already did mention, Ryan would still have his powers. And the only reason I say that is because, like I mentioned earlier, there is no precedent for a soup born naturally. So any rules that have been established for characters, whether it is from Soldier Boy's beam or anything else, do not apply to Ryan. So it is completely plausible for him to still have his powers. And why would he still have his powers? For what greater purpose? Well, maybe because they would continue Gen V, and in Gen V we would see Vought start to rise again, and an integral character to helping prevent this would be Ryan with his powers, and we would then get to see Ryan working with the Gen V kids to help stop Vought from returning. And that's essentially it. Again, like I said, I did not overall have issues with the finale, aside from it feeling very rushed. And while I will admit there were certain elements to season 5 that I wasn't a fan of at all, there were also some elements that I absolutely loved. So all in all, I enjoyed the season, but I can understand why a lot of people had issues, and I can also acknowledge that there was definitely a ton of room for improvement for the season overall. But I'm interested to hear from all of you. Which of these changes do you think would have helped best? And would you have liked it if Gen V continued after this series and we actually got to see Ryan even more? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.